Rolling, rolling, rolling.
Actually, 2 years. I mean, we haven't seen each other in 2 years. It's been terrible, man. Couldn't go outside for exercise, so I got fat. So I'm working on that. We're getting older too, man. So I mean, look at me. I have glasses now.
It's good to be back. It is so exciting to see real people. Nobody has sat still for the past 2 years. The sophistication that we're seeing now and the quality of the discussion is fantastic. It is exciting, and it's really starting to create a whole new level of creativity.
And that's something that I missed being around.
It was funny, the week or two heading up to this, Matt and Michael and Fred, they were excited. It's almost like Christmas is coming, It was gonna be the last minute, can we get out?
If we conceptualize data as something only pertaining to legality and something that can be misused, I think we're missing out on actually being good companies, good stores, good service providers towards customers. And I think about this not just from the perspective of somebody producing data or collecting it, but also as a personal consumer. I don't think that I need only to be protected from. I also want to be given opportunities too. And that's where my data plays an important part. And if I can't, like for instance, the discussion about whether Google Analytics is illegal, if I'm legally, prohibited from actually using my data to improve the services I interface with, I really don't think that's actually in my interest.
We came in a situation where the entire internet industry is based on advertisement. Now, it doesn't look like so, but if you think about it, Google is one of the biggest internet companies ever. Is it like a tech company? Well, let's look at their revenue. And the same goes with Facebook. I think over 95% maybe of the revenue is coming from advertisement. So the question here is, all this massive work that Google is doing, setting up the infrastructure of the internet, setting up the infrastructure of the cloud, setting up all the cables that connect the world together, all of that is really funded by the advertising industry. So the question here, or the problem that we are trying to solve now with all this is, what if we just shut down this part of the internet? What's left out of it?
But what about if these data transfer laws become stricter and stricter and I'm not able to share anything with US anymore? Nothing, just by virtue of visiting my site or loading a script from the US CDN because of it's so convenient. It's a thought experiment that I find really scary to see through to the conclusion. Like I said, I don't think it's going to come to that, but these are setting precedents. I work with the Google stack. I'm not going to lie. I've been shopping around. I've been looking at other tools. I've been looking at other things to focus on than a tool that is possibly becoming, maybe not outlawed outright, but it's possibly becoming a hindrance in data collection efforts for companies.
A large part of Amazon's business, a large part of Google's business, a large part of Microsoft's business, they're all ramping up on their cloud business. That means that the cloud is the strategic move for some of the biggest companies in the world. They are seeing cloud as their main growth area. They suddenly cannot operate outside the US. Then they will be forced to do something. They will be doing some serious lobbyism to try to impact the government because this threatens their core business. Because if other countries adopt what the EU is saying about no American cloud providers are technically legal, then suddenly their growth will be massively hindered.
There's no discussion about this is a global geopolitical game. And while we talk about US and Europe, China is playing a role also and has come out with their own version of the GDPR and their own version of what surveillance and competition means.
I mean, even Russia and China are talking about it, so you know something is right. So yeah, it is going to destabilize a few things. Does it mean that governments will have no longer a way of controlling citizens using data? I'm not sure, but it does pave the way for, and not to be too idealistic, but for more not open data, but more freer data.
The legislation China put out and Asia Pacific is really moving rather forward very fast. But the legislation China put out, while similar to the GDPR, also created other entities which are part of compliance reporting that are rather close to competition in the sense that it used to be the case that you could not take data out of China. Now you can, but you need to report it with a certain authority.
I would say we are going towards data individualism, which could be also impacted by different sort of geopolitical changes as well. You have already seen, like in terms of politics, there has been this shift towards individualism. These things impact each other and sort of have a way of like a house of cards. You just move one card and then the entire house falls down.
So it's a global geopolitical game, but where I still believe that Europe and the United States are closer in terms of what we want for our societies than potentially other superpowers that are starting to show their cards.
With pandemic, more and more people moved online, but people who weren't using online services for some reason, they had to adapt to that change. So basically the user base has grown dramatically. And then when it comes to privacy regulations, there has been a lot of things done over the last 2 years, and it partially overlaps with the raise of consumer base and their raising expectations. So if we talk about changes in the privacy field, it's not only changes in the platforms and not only changes in legislation.
Based on the experience of the last 2 years, being in one place necessarily for lockdown limits our exposure to other people, but other cultures. And being exposed to other cultures helps us to realize, okay, so we have this commonality, this common ingredient of data that we're all using, but different cultures are using the data in different ways. And this understanding, this empathy is a necessary practice.
I'm located in the US, and so I probably have a different perspective than people who are more directly affected by the regulations and laws. Any time that somebody stops and thinks, hey, maybe it's not good that companies can run things without any kind of accountability or any kind of questioning of what they're doing or any kind of, regulation or governance, generally it helps with innovation to be able to do that, but then there's a certain point where innovation levels off and it just becomes normal. It becomes where we are, and that's when you need to start looking at these things and saying, are we better off because of this, because of the way that we do it?
What's crazy is that the EU, with all of the different viewpoints and histories in different countries, have managed to fight through and have mechanism. You would think that bridging differences across different countries that are very, very different, coming together and coming out with any sort of a imperfect standard or enforcement mechanism seems like that would be a crazy tall order. And yet you wind up with GDPR, and not that and then Austria does this thing and people sort of scrutinize it. Somehow the US, it's one country, but because of the political rift, it is so hard to get agreement on anything because 70% of the discussion has nothing to do with the issue. It's about, I just want you to lose and I want to win.
If the US isn't going to do it, if they can't take responsibility, if they don't think it's a big deal, then either companies or other governments need to do it. So you notice companies, the example is Apple. Apple has held Facebook, for example, more accountable than any government has. You know, if it wasn't for the platform to make that change, to say, hey, we want to protect our users, we think that this privacy is bad, even if it's under the guise of corporate profits, which it was for Apple.
Facebook, I think, just announced maybe today that they are expecting to lose 10 billion because of the iOS changes. You know, just a little switch that was just turned off and 10 billion disappeared. And that would affect how the company operates to a certain degree. So just imagine that this is happening a full scale on the internet.
I think that, you know, I come from a free market economy, from a capitalist society, but one of the cool things about the US is that, or generally, is that when something goes too far, they correct it. And that's just how it's been. That's the mentality.
I think it's the power of who control the ads, because Apple still serve the ads in their own way, but now when you take out this ability to track users from Facebook and the other vendors, guess who has it? Apple. So you need to go through them somehow if you need to play their game. And when I scale that to regulations, I think it's pretty much the same thing.
I think in the US, certainly you have people who care quite a bit, but I think as a whole, it's not that we don't care about data privacy, but we don't look at it in the same way that a lot of people in the EU do. And so I think one of the most stark realizations is as an American, when I go to a website, most websites don't have some kind of a cookie consent bar, you know, accepting cookies, denying cookies, whatever. Even in California, where we have CCPA, that's an opt-out, not an opt-in, and you don't really see much evidence of it on any website you go to. And so, you know, it feels very normal to just pull up a website and start browsing. Whereas you come to the EU and immediately any website you go to, you're hit with a banner or a box where you have to accept cookies. You can't go to a website here without that. And for me personally, or as an American, that's very, very different. It's very jarring, I think, to feel immediately that this is a thing that I have to get on board with everywhere that I go on any website here.
In the US, it's about individual freedoms and individual rights, but there's, you know, at a systemic level, so many things in the US seem just so foreign to when you talk to people in Europe. Like, how did you get to that? And I think it is kind of just an underlying culturally not having, I guess, a cultural intuition around the issue of privacy.
As I previously discussed, and I will give credit to my cherished colleague Miles Younger for describing this as like the classic physics three-body problem, where we have tech, regulation and public opinion as the three bodies. The physics problem states that the orbits are so complex in this system that you cannot predict where these entities are going to go.
More and more they want their nationals' data to remain within their own markets. They don't want that data to be stored somewhere else because they feel like that data could be then misused for other purposes. So I do feel that we are going into more individualistic approach, like we own our own data, we like store our own data, and it should be our country, our region that should make profit out of it.
There's a lot of slippery slope arguments to be had. If you outlaw the sending of Google Analytics data somewhere, you are implicitly outlawing all types of dispatches, or many different types of dispatches. So if you follow that argument to some kind of logical conclusion, you end up with a situation where Europe has its own internet, and the US has its own internet, China has its own internet. It's probably not going to come to that, but it is something that people are thinking about, and it is worrying. Because, as we all know, one of the key marks of the internet is that it's a global, it's a kind of a unifying thing.
In fact, it relates to also the national borders and national interests and lack of trust between different countries, lack of desire to be governed by a shared set of rules and rather pursue our own definitions. So here we've got the European Union against other kind of areas in the world, but also within Europe, as we've seen with the UK leaving, the desire to have sovereign say on how we should do these things. I think it's actually a big challenge for individuals, for people moving around, living where they want to live, using the things they want to use. So I'm a little bit wary of the discourse on this, very much in the terms of privacy violations and the right to privacy. I don't think it's a well thought out concept.
There's enough things that are political in this world. I don't know that I want my data to also be political. I think that some people are looking at it that way, and that's why we've gotten to this point of it being so heavily regulated. I don't think that that's the stance that a lot of Americans take in particular. We don't really look at it in the same way. I don't want my data to be a political issue, and I don't even really think of it as my data. I just think of it as I went to a website, so they know that I saw a few things and they might cookie me, and that's fine. I'll see an ad somewhere, but it doesn't bother me.
On the level of society, there's a lot more data. The ability to collect and store data sets over long periods of time is unprecedented in history. And a good example is surveillance camera. In the past, you probably analyze the flow and detect something, and then you would destroy that data. Now you have cases, I think the UK was an example, where they can keep 20 years of raw data flows. And then with these new technologies, you can actually process that data and detect, we've seen that person before, 15 years ago, on that camera. For me, that's the tipping point. That's where it gets a little bit, it comes in through the back door. We haven't really had that discussion.
Europe is leading the trend, and having given you the example of all this, the catalysts in the automotive sector and in the industry out there, I think the same will happen now with data privacy. So we will create a lot of jobs in Europe, and we are actively writing the history here.
I think this is where certainly there's a lot of conversations about short-term versus long-term. And I think in what we do as well, when we talk about, for example, KPIs in terms of campaigns and things like that, it's very short-term. Now we need maybe to start thinking in terms of longer-term visions of data, lifetime values of the customers, instead of short-term campaigns that are beneficial or not, potentially for a certain period of time, but not in the long run.
And the one thing that people aren't talking about enough is, with all these privacy laws and control mechanisms and everything, people are solely looking at things that are being taken away from us. Less data, fewer data points, fewer identifiers. But there's an opportunity there as well. There's a lot of opportunity. There's a differentiating factor on how well your company is privacy compliant. There's possibilities to build businesses that are completely compliant, that are completely EU-based, for example.
The one thing I have on my pet peeve list is that we have no sovereign clouds in Europe. There's no cloud provider that even comes remotely to the level of AWS or GCP or Azure when it comes to volume, scalability, features, interface. We are literally 25 years behind.
This is a really very good opportunity to EU-based vendors to grow up. This is a really good market growing up now, and you have a very strong competitive advantage that is only your geographic location that you are based. It doesn't matter if you are the best provider. Everyone needs now a EU-based cloud provider. So that's a very good opportunity for growth in this sector.
China's got its own thing that we don't really know about. I mean, you got the Baidus and the other, the Alibabas. They have their own huge infrastructures we can't really see, but they're okay. Russia has its own thing, same thing. Europe is naked. So Europe has to build it's a bit late, but we do have to step up our hosting strategies and then the cloud infrastructures that go with them.
In a lot of situations, we see the regulators coming up with laws that doesn't really reflect what we are doing. It doesn't seem as if the regulator really understands what's the impact of these decisions on the users and on the tech.
How was GDPR actually implemented? It was implemented as a cookie approval. And what happened? The only thing that happened was that 95% of everybody just clicks yes to avoid that, which actually increased the amount of consent, not decrease it. That was not the original conversation we had around privacy, that we wanted to protect people from being monitored. And in essence, it drove up that.
Yes, they have this consent mode, and they have this, check banner, checkbox. But if you think about it, it's not really compliant. It doesn't say what the GDPR, forced it to say.
We're getting more and more regulations that go to very specific use cases for data. And I'm hoping that it keeps going because it's both a way to set a legal framework, but also see what the limitation of the law is versus what the reality of the terrain, of the websites, of the apps is like.
I do think we have good alternatives, and I think somebody like Chris Evald also showed what those are. And there's plenty of many similar to that.
We need to cross-pollinate what's going on over here. And there's a lot of innovation at a very high speed in blockchain, and cross-pollinate that over to what we've been doing in the data and analytics world.
And the first movers, ironically, are governments. Because governments are the first to feel the pressure to comply to the new legislation. And they really can't do it with the existing providers. But the moment where privacy is built into a system in which individuals have control, and so it kind of supersedes the existing requirements, really, from the GDPR, then I think we've got a chance to actually get even further than what they can do elsewhere.
Does it mean that we can put all the data there? No, because the disadvantage of the blockchain is that once it's in the block, it cannot be changed. Again, back to the privacy aspect, we have the right to be forgotten. We have the right to say we want the data to be removed. And that doesn't mean only removing, let's say, a key to access the data. It means the actual data must be destroyed. So we need a dual approach where we say blockchain generates or gives us the decentralized trust, but the actual data piece should not be on-chain. It should be on a decentralized data store where we can actually decide to destroy the data. We've gone through phases where in the beginning it was about can we get the data? Then at some point it was can we stitch the data? And we all know the holy grail was, can we figure out what people are going to do based on the data? We went into a third phase where we started with GDPR and other privacy regulations to give some power back to the user. But I think we are absolutely nowhere where we should be.
So often we've been lazy. We've been fat and happy for so long, and now we need to realise that the use of the data is very much connected to two key qualities. Data has to have a value, but in order to realise that value, we need to understand the purpose.
With a lot of analytics, it's like we collect the data first just so that we can have the largest set of questions that we might be able to ask in the future. So it's almost like a risk management with respect to the potential set of questions that we can ask, right? It's almost like optimizing that potential set. But you don't know if any of those questions are going to have any value or not, answering those questions.
Why do you need to get the screen size? Why do you need to get the device that they're using? So I think, and I hope, we are moving into this paradigm of thinking about collecting less for more. I think it's a really mix of like shifting cultures, shift in law, shift in how analysts are thinking. There is really some sort of like a common consent that something wrong is happening. And the way it works now with this massive harvesting of data should really stop.
With experimentation, it's actually quite different, regardless of what, it's not really about the software, it's about conceptually, experimentation is really where the data collection is part of the design. So you have the question first. I'm asking a question, and it's actually a causal inference question, which is, will one of these experiences yield some change in behavior? Okay, I'm not making a prediction about the world, I'm really making a causal. It's like, does the world respond such that making this change alters behavior, customer demand? Some sort of demand elasticity with respect to this change in behavior. And so that requires us to collect the data along with the question. So I want to answer this question, so now I'm collecting this data just in time. The data is collected for this question. It's custom to this question. And that's really where we're different. And what's interesting about that is that actually, I think, provides a sort of a line of demarcation between what's historically been sort of regular analytics, which a lot of times it's just this just-in-case data collection. So we're just gonna collect stuff just in case. We may not have like an explicit question. So the query comes after the data.
What I'm really interested in is the idea of using tools to get control. It doesn't matter what the tools are, it doesn't matter what the processes are, but anything that gives me control over the data, over the upstream flows, like that's so important. So one of the technologies is server-side tagging, server-side tracking, because it kind of gives me, and it gives the company an opportunity to zoom in on the collection side, protect the data, create kind of a staging area for it, and then decide what is flown over, what is dispatched to the vendors.
Each company should own their data firsthand. So we call it data sovereignty. It doesn't make sense that I run a website and I do not have the data of my visitors, but I need to get it from Google or from Facebook because they have grabbed it directly from the user device, and I use their tools then for reporting, all great stuff. But I believe the company should have the data first and decide how to forward the data.
And people either choosing to have more control over their own data pipelines, right? Where maybe they'll host their own trackers, right? Maybe they'll be building their own data warehouses, or with some technologies that are out there in the bigger tools, using APIs or other direct exports like the BigQuery to maintain their data. But it's really, people are benefiting from the fact that they can work with data in the cloud.
All the chaos is really about one part of the data, which is the analytical data, the data that we could use for advertisement. This data that could go into analytical advertising, could be used for programmatic advertising, that could be used for, tracking people, which is only one part of the story. On the other part, you have operational data that are essential for the business. So what happens now with these essential data?
So I think that's the newer piece. People are getting more comfortable with the cloud, and more excited about it, and more people are learning how to do it. I think they're adding a layer of cloud on top of vendor in many cases. It's not necessarily a replacement for the tool, but adds an additional layer on top of it. And capabilities, so people are doing both. They're not abandoning their tools, but they're adding cloud capability. With the exception of, let's say, there's maybe like a subgroup in the industry is like, no, actually, now that we can create our own trackers, we can own our own data flows completely, that's what we would like to do. And I think that's kind of the snowplow and snowflake sort of approach, right? Oh, great, I can have my own tracker, I can manage it really granularly, it's all self-owned, I can change the data when I need it. It's a lot more work, it's a lot more maintenance, internal cost to do it yourself, but the cost of all that has come down so much that it's a reasonable player.
So when you think about the alternative, or the kind of the status quo, is that vendors are their scripts are running in the browser and they're allowed to do whatever they want. Just by virtue of downloading their scripts, they have full privilege, full access to the site, to the user's browser. With server-side and with those types of tools, we gain more control. And I think with all the talk about legislation these days, even more than before, with data transfer laws between the European Union and the United States, control is just so much, it has just so much more importance all the time. And being able to associate risk with the lack of control and being able to identify the pain points in a company's data collection. And those are just they're just so interesting questions. But one thing is for sure is that you can't delegate control to a company, to a vendor who has vested interests.
How it started, it's very different from how it is now. And I always wonder, like when you talk with Facebook, with Google, how can you justify their intentions if this massive portion of their income is driven by data harvesting?
We need to stop feeding data into these, and the simple example would be, the 4 biggest companies in the world their business case is to extract value from the data feeds. That is their business case. And they have become giant companies from doing that.
It's driven by profiling people across the web and being able to serve them with this programmatic advertising. So I think, in my opinion, finding a solution for the programmatic advertising is finding a solution for the future of the web.
You know that like modern data stack thing that people talk about? I believe that there's some truth to it. I'm not as big on the buzzword and the jargon around it, but there's some truth there. You can build it yourself now without so much effort. Some significant effort, but it's not unattainable to have to be able to build a system. You might, again, that's a minority, but I think that more people are moving into cloud and valuing how we can use data warehouse technology as it is applied to digital analytics data.
For me, it's all about that. For me, it's taking, this sounds like a political thing, but taking back control in a way. Not in the Brexit way, but in the way that this is, your company is collecting this data, you are a processor, and you should act like it. You should be in charge of things. Every year we talk about the same thing, and it's we always list a number of technologies, and I think that hasn't changed. We're still obsessed about the tools and the technologies, and obviously everybody's talking about Google Analytics 4, either for good reasons or bad reasons. It's top of mind for everyone.
Yeah, GA4. Oh, I mean, GA4, it's so interesting because I see myself now more and more being on the using whatever data is available, not on the data collection side, because it's really complicated and there are a ton of people who are focusing on it. GA4 is interesting because just stepping back, it seems like it is a richer and better way to collect and store the data. It seems like a better data model, but it does mean a lot of people are going to have to learn and change what they're doing. So I can't tell how much is when GA4 is getting criticized for not being mature and how much of it is just people are going to have to learn something new and change, and that's just fear, uncertainty, and doubt, versus how much is truly grounded in a legitimate, concern.
I'm bullish on GA4 for several reasons. First of all is that it's the first rethinking we've had about analytics for the masses in a long time. And I say for the masses because maybe there's been some innovation in more enterprise level tools or really hard to implement tools, but the appeal to GA regular, GA3 if you will, to me in the first place was it's so easy. Because of that, because it's so easy to use, it became bloated. It became like, let's throw every feature in there, let's make everything possible. And it is, it's built on Web 2.0 technology, not Web 3.0 or not current web technology. And so it's basically an opportunity to refresh everything, to say, let's minimize the amount of data we collect, let's make it more pointed, let's make it more malleable so we can make modifications to it. Let's lower the footprint of Google Analytics on the internet in order to make it so that we are adjusting for the future, not trying to live in the past.
And I think the biggest change is that GA4 looks and feels very different. The reports look different, they're named different, some of the dimensions are different, and to be able to get the same level of insights, you might have to pull things in a different way or go into the Explore section and do things a little bit more custom, and that's a big change for users to have to learn a whole new tool and get on board with it. That being said, I think with the new data model that comes with GA4, there's a lot of opportunity.
I was a huge fan of Firebase Analytics when it came out years and years ago, and then it turned into Google Analytics for Firebase, and then it turned into Atlas Web, and now it's GA4. I was a huge fan. I really like product analytics. I think they do a lot of things right. I like the idea that it was very raw and you can kind of shape the data however you like. And I'm still somewhat of a fan, but for me, I'm not ecstatic about the developments in Google Analytics 4 because it seems like it's being shoehorned into a next level of universal analytics, so the next level of Google's analytics stack. So a lot of the terminology and a lot of the features that we've kind of come accustomed to in universal analytics are being shoehorned into GA4. Things like sessions and things like session-based conversion rates and attribution models, and I'm just not a fan. I think they're giving up on the ideal of having a product analytics tool, and they're just going back with that. I don't know what the solution. If I were Google, I would do the exact same thing. It would be, like we talked with yesterday at the fireside, it would be unsustainable to have two competing analytics stacks under Google.
The biggest difference is the data schema, the structure of the data. It is very different. GA4 is an event and parameter data model, right? So it looks and feels different. It's a much more scalable data model.
I think that it's just this weird point where we're talking about it during a transition where a few years from now it's going to be amazing, potentially way better than universal. Right now, it's not the same, and so most people dislike it because it's not the same of what they've been using for years.
But the other thing about GA4 is that as a data collection mechanism, it's actually pretty solid. It's a good library, global site tag for it, and the semantic model is fine with events and parameters. So when you use that as your incoming data stream to server-side tagging, for example, server-side GTM, then it makes a lot of sense. It's a pretty snappy library, and you can use it to encode a lot of information into the stream, and you don't have to send it to Google anymore with server-side tagging. You can kind of keep it in-house or share it with whatever vendors you want. So for that, I think it's pretty exciting, but it's a completely different world. Now we're talking about GA4 as a data collection library, and there are probably far better libraries for data collection alone, like more mature libraries that have been doing this for ages, Mixpanel, Amplitude, Snowplow. But I think that Google is doing a good thing with that, and they are coupling it very closely with the developments in Google Tag Manager. So Google Tag Manager and Global Site Tag, which is kind of the underlying tech of GA4, they're merging together. It's already technically, they are the same thing. And we'll see more of this in the future. And what I'm worried about here again is having GTM over-rely on GA4 and thus placing all the other data collection mechanisms at a disadvantage. I hope it doesn't come to that. Every now and then they listen to my feedback, and I've been trying to be very vocal about this, that I don't want it to become like that. I want them to give full range of access to whatever data collection, data pipeline, data ingestion mechanism we want, not just GA4. But again, if I were Mr. Google or Mrs. Google, I would certainly do it the same way. That's exactly how I would do it. I would build incentives into the tool itself to get people to use other tools that I own. Of course, that's how it works with Google Ads and Google Analytics as well.
So, in reality, sadly, the internet is built on advertisement, and we need to fix that. And honestly, I have no answer to that, but I think we should seek something, or we will not like what's coming.
We're still on, right?
Yeah. I think you can quote me on this. Fourth wall break. Julian's the smartest man I know.
Julian? No way do I know.
That can go on YouTube as well.
Cool. I'm here all week. So